Shalom and welcome. This episode will cover from Shem to Abraham and what Proto-Semites looked like. As a disclaimer, I'd like to point out that whatever the conclusion is, whether or not the first Semitic populations were dark-skinned or light-skinned, this doesn't mean that if you're light-skinned or dark-skinned today, you can't descend from Semites or be Semitic yourself and vice versa. Ultimately, if you want to determine Semitic ancestry, you should use genetics, such as haplogroups, because phenotype is not a determiner of ancestry. As a matter of fact, genetically speaking, you could descend from dark-skinned or light-skinned ancestors and look totally different from your forefathers. You can even right now be related to dark-skinned and light-skinned populations and look totally different as well. So keep all of this in mind. Just as a quick example of being paternally related to someone but looking totally different, let's take Ashkenazi Jews as an example. Specifically, Ashkenazi Jews such as Albert Einstein and an Amhara Ethiopian, which both can share the exact same paternal ancestor, E-M123. Yet Albert Einstein looks completely different. He looks Ashkenazi and he lives in Germany of Europe. However, the Amhara looks Ethiopian and lives in Ethiopia of Africa. Yet they both are related and look completely different. Furthermore, they share the same forefather, and their forefather could have looked like a black African or a tan-skinned Mediterranean or even a Nordic German. Both Albert Einstein and this Amhara would still be related under E-M123, regardless of how the first E-M123 man looked. Their ancient forefather could have looked completely different from the both of them, but it doesn't matter, they are still both Semitic. And my last example, just to push this point even further, about sharing an ancestor but not looking like your ancestor. Thomas Jefferson has two sets of descendants, one that is white from his wife and the other that is black from his slave Sally Hemings. Genetics was able to prove that the black side of the family is indeed descendant from Thomas Jefferson, who is obviously a white European looking man. This is yet another example of having an ancestor that looks nothing like you and being related to people who also look nothing like you.
Many Americans know the third president of the United States and author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, was an important figure in the emergence of early American identity and is considered one of the major founding fathers of the country. And although many today argue over his own personal moral character and ethics, it was a major point of contention even hundreds of years ago, and many spread rumors of Jefferson's ongoing affair with his slave Sally Hemings and whether he was the father of her 6 children, an act which would have been highly frowned upon even in the 18th century. Centuries later, in 1998, it has seemingly been proven through DNA tests that Jefferson was indeed the biological father of Hemings' children, despite the fact that there were no viable biological samples of the deceased president in existence. So how did they do it? When it comes to human genetics, perhaps the best way to determine hypodescent or common ancestry in individuals and population clusters is through a specific genetic marker known as a haplogroup. So how did historians in the 1990s come to the conclusion that Thomas Jefferson was indeed the father of Hemings' 6 children, of whom 4 survived to adulthood and had married and had children of their own? Indeed, there were no viable DNA samples of Jefferson to be found, and no male descendants that could be verifiably traced back to him, so seemingly his haplogroup line had ended with him. However, geneticists were able to get biological samples of not Jefferson's offspring, but that of the descendants of his paternal uncle, who, if we follow what biology has taught us, would indeed match that of Jefferson in all of his direct male descendants. The haplogroup of Jefferson's distant paternal cousin was indeed a match for Jefferson's alleged multiracial sons and daughters, all of whom, it should be noted, were freed in Jefferson's will and grew up to marry into the white community, with some legally changing their surname to Jefferson.
With all that being said, this video isn't to undermine anyone's Semitic background whether you're dark-skinned or light-skinned, because you can still descend from early Semitic populations either way. Phenotypes can change, but haplogroups don't. With that being said, the goal of this video is to see the best and most logical outcome for the phenotype of the ancestors of Semites, as well as the phenotype of early Semitic populations, as well as using this to see the likely phenotype of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And again, no matter what the conclusion is for Abraham's phenotype, you can be white, brown, and black today and still descend from Abraham through the DNA. The phenotype can change depending on who you mix with maternally on the female lineage, but the Y DNA doesn't change, and no matter how you look, you can still descend from Abraham. And with that being said, our goal is to still figure out what did Abraham look like. In order to do this, we have to know the ancestors of Semites. What did they look like? And then we'll have to see what did the earliest Proto-Semitic populations look like, as well as look at ancient Semitic populations that are related to Abraham to determine his phenotype. All of this and more should give us a decent understanding of Abraham's overall look. With that being said, let's begin.